Hi, I'm Anna from sew.lala Patterns and I will guide you through the view C of my martyr skirt today. I decided to do the view C because it contains most of the difficult parts that could be a challenge for you, so with the help of this sew along, you are capable of doing all versions. The martyr skirt is a classic A-line but gathered skirt that leaves you with a lot of comfort because of its elastic waistband and its length that ensures that you have a really nice range of movement. The sewing pattern contains 4 different designs, and those are meant as a recommendation. I always like to think of sewing patterns like recipes. If you don't like something, make a change of it. So those are meant to mix and match as you like to, so you can create your own design. You can take one waistband and combine it with a different skirt or add a tier where there is no tier in one view. So all the things that are needed are contained in the sewing pattern. Before you start sewing your martyr, you want to double check or triple check that you have cut out all pattern pieces that are needed. After cutting out all your pattern pieces, please also double check that you have transferred all marks and notches. Since you will stitch in the ditch at the waistband, you will need a thread, a yarn that is really matching your fabric. So make sure that it's the same color. If not 100% possible, please choose a darker one, because when you stitch in the ditch, you want your seam to be as invisible as possible. The martyr sewing pattern has a seam and a hem allowance of 1 centimeter included in all pattern pieces, which will be the standard seam allowance unless it's otherwise stated. In general, when I show version view C here in this video, this means for all other views. This video contains helpful instructions, but don't ignore the written instructions, please, because there are steps for the other views that are not included in the version C or in the view C. So we will start with sewing and preparing the bottom blanket, which is a really simple and easy step. At the fabric edge of your front skirt pieces, you will interface with a thin fusible your fabric edge. This is really helpful for sewing the bottom blanket later on. Press on the interfacing, fold it 2 centimeters to the wrong side and 2 centimeters again, and press it nicely. And then you will sew with a narrow edge stitch all along. If you want to, you can also sew at the outer fold line. But sewing along the inner fold line is crucial. This is optional. I leave it up to you and your style if you like to have it too. If you plan on sewing with an edge stitch presser foot, you have to remember to switch your needle to move it to the side that you need to sew and that you want to sew, and also please remember to choose a matching needle to your fabric. Next step is the same for every view, so please pay attention, everybody. We are going to sew the side seam pocket now. You have the pocket pieces prepared. You have 4 of them, so 2 pairs, and you have transferred the notches, and on the upper side edge of your front piece, on both front pieces, you also have 2 notches transferred, which have the same distance as the one on the pocket pattern piece. I will show you the procedure on one front side. You will just repeat it in the same way for the other side, please. First step is that you are putting the correct pocket pattern piece. The fabric choice was not the best because I don't have a visible wrong side of fabric for you because it's the same color. It has a different structure, but that's only visible if you're close to the fabric. So just picture this is your right side of the fabric. This is the right side of the fabric. So you face, when you have put it right sides facing on your front pattern piece, you are seeing the wrong side of your pocket pattern piece. Match the notches at the side edge correctly and pin in place, please. I have marked on the pattern piece of the pocket where to sew because it's a little bit confusion for some people looking at the instructions in written form. So you start at 1 notch, sew down 1 centimeter the seam allowance, pivot here, sew down with 1 centimeter seam allowance, pivot again, and sew back to the other notch. So you have kind of a rectangle, missing one long side. After sewing, you will cut in a 45-degree angle right to the corner, but don't clip into the seams, please. You will cut in here in both corners, and then you will press apart the pocket and the front pattern piece. After sewing one pocket pattern piece and pressing it away from the front skirt, you need to edge a stitch here, or to top stitch, understitch, it's understitching, sorry. I always prefer to mark where the seam starts and ends. So it's basically on height where your notch has been before and where your seam towards the notch is placed. So if you like to make those marks, otherwise if you don't want to, just sew between those 2 points. Do the same on the other pocket. Before heading to the next step, I highly recommend to you to finish the edge of this straight seam on your side seam between those notches so that it does not get damaged when washing your skirt. Then you are folding your back piece to the wrong side of your skirt piece and you nicely form out those corners. You have those really small seams, 1 centimeter long at the notches. You really nicely form them and press it. Both of your front pattern pieces should look like this. They should have this kind of weird rectangle cut out here at the side edge. Both of your pockets are pressed to the back of to the wrong side of your fabric. So now we're getting to the French seam part of your pocket finish. You place your front pattern piece of the skirt with the wrong side facing you, so the right side of your pocket is facing you, because you have it placed wrong sides facing now. Then you will flip over the pocket piece and you will place the matching second pocket piece on the other pocket piece, wrong sides facing. This is really important. So when you do a French seam, the first seam always sews together 2 pieces with the right side on the outside. So both pocket pieces now face you. When you flip it over, you will always see the right side of the fabric of your pocket pieces. Pin it together. You best start at the ends of your pocket. I always feel it's the nicest to first pin the ends and then go all the way around, but you can go all the way around, whatever you like to. This is just how I do it. And then you just fill in with the pins and sew with 1/2 centimeter, which is 1/4 inch. After trimming back the seam allowance to 3 millimeters, you will turn the pocket inside out. This time it's really inside out because now you're looking at the wrong side of your fabric and the inside is the right side of your fabric. So the wrong side of your fabric is facing you at your pocket, and you will shape nicely all the edges, press it, and then you will sew with 1/2 centimeter seam allowance all along the edges of your pockets. This is what your bag looks like now. You have this rectangle, but you also have the other second half of your pocket peeking out here. And you can see it here on this bag that you see from the inside of your skirt, that you still have some loose ends moving around. So you pin them to the skirt pattern piece and you finish off the side seam with a serger or with a zigzag. Well, the finish of your choice. After finishing off the side seams of your front skirt pattern piece or pattern pieces, depending on the view that you're sewing, including the pocket opening, you will do the same for your back skirt piece. You will finish off the side edges, and afterwards you place the front and the back skirt piece or pieces right sides facing and sew together along the side seam. When pinning together both of your skirt pieces, make sure that you evenly distribute the length of it so that you don't have places where you have a bubbly seam at the end. And also make sure that you don't pin in the pocket opening, so that you only pin the skirt pieces, but not, I will show it, but not the opening. So it needs to be free. And you will sew with a seam allowance of 1 centimeter, as I already mentioned, right next to the opening, so that it remains open. After sewing, you will press the seams open and we will turn to the waistband. Before we start sewing the waistband, we prepare the skirt to attach it to the waistband. We do this by doing gathering stitching all along the top edge of your skirt, which means that you do 2 parallel rows with a stitch length of 5. I always use approximately 1 centimeter from the border, from the edge, but yeah, you can do closer or wider as you wish. But we do 2 parallel rows of gathering stitches using the stitch length 5 with a standard straight stitch. The loose ends of your gathering stitching, please don't cut it away, just leave it as it is. You need it to pull the fabric together later on when you start the gathering. When sewing view C, make sure that you have the waistband on the right length, also that you have transferred the marks so that you can sew the side seam for your waistband correctly. For waistband C, you have this small opening on the inside of your waistband on both sides of your side seam, so you sew it the same on both sides. For view A and B, you just need to have it on one side. For view D, you don't need to leave an opening at all. The opening will be later on the inside of your waistband, so make sure that you mind the grain. So the pattern, if you have a pattern, should follow this direction as the rest of your skirt. The opening is sewn by sewing this short distance towards the first marking, and then below the second marking you close the rest of the side seam. I have already pressed now everything, so I have pressed open the seam allowance on the back of your waistband. I have pressed it in half lengthwise, and I have also pressed the seam allowance as given in the instructions to the inside, to the wrong side of your fabric. So which means that on the front of your waistband, your future front, you press 1 centimeter to the wrong side of your fabric, and on the opposite side, which will be later the inside of your waistband, so on the inside of your skirt visible, you only press 0.75 centimeters to the inside. So when you look at it from the front, the back of your waistband should be visible and a little bit longer than the front. This is important because in the future, when you sew shut the waistband, you will stitch in the ditch, and you need this to stitch it to the skirt. Start to match the waistband that you've prepared to the top of your skirt where you have the gathering stitches. Very important, you need to leave the seam allowance of your waistband unpinned, so it needs to be extra next to the bottom placket. I wanted to emphasize that it's really important that you put a pin next to your bottom placket if you're sewing view C or D, because you don't want to gather the bottom placket itself. You want to start next to it, so this is marking the start of the gathering. Then we can start to gather the skirt. It's really important that you either take both of your top threads or both of your bobbin threads. So you can't mix top and bobbin thread. You have to decide which of those you want to pull on both of your basting stitching. Yes. I show you what happens if you pull. I take the bobbin threads. If I pull them, you see that the fabric pulls nicely together and automatically gets to the same width of your waistband. If you feel like you want to place extra needles, just do so. It's really helpful for sewing. Make sure that you distribute the gathering on the back of your skirt evenly, and then you can sew when you finished it for the whole length of your waistband. Sew along the pinned edge with 1 centimeter seam allowance and press apart the waistband and skirt. Also, you have to remove the gathering stitches so that you only have the seam here that sews the skirt to the waistband. Fold over the waistband to the right side of your waistband and pin it together. Make sure that you have it folded at the pre-pressed edge, which means that the back of your waistband will be a little bit longer than the front of your waistband. Sew like that with 1 centimeter seam allowance. Make sure that you don't sew into the button blanket. Afterwards, you turn the waistband inside out and press the edge and the corner nicely. Afterwards, you pin the back of your waistband on the inside, but the pins are placed on the outside of your waistband. This is important because you will stitch in the ditch. That means that you will sew in the previous seam ditch. So your seam is placed exactly here where you have pressed apart waistband and skirt, which means that on the back of your skirt, the fabric of the waistband needs to be a little bit longer and overlap the seam. Why do we pin on the outside and not on the inside of the skirt? Because you will sew from the outside. Because if you sew from the inside, you can't stitch in the ditch. So here you see your waistband from the inside with the small edge seam here, and as you see on the outside of your waistband, you don't see anything. Pretty nice, huh? Now it's time to pull through the elastic through the casing. Make sure to double check that the measurements are right by putting on the skirt after pulling through the elastic. The elastic is calculated by the chart in your instructions. Please consult it. Basically, it's your waist measurements divided by 2 plus 2 centimeters extra seam allowance. So you pull it through the opening on one side. Make sure that you fix it, that it does not get pulled through, but that it stays here, and pull it through to the other side. And then you pin the elastic with 1 centimeter seam allowance extra folded into the front of your waistband. You fix it to the side seam of your waistband, and also you sew it this way. Make sure that you don't sew into the back of your waistband, so be a little bit careful, and it's basically just stitching in the ditch as you did with the rest of your waistband. Do this on both sides. Here's a small trick if you're concerned to get your opening sides in the way of the seam. Just pin them to the sides and then the opening remains open, and you can easily sew in the ditch without sewing one side of the opening to the seam as well. After finishing the waistband, you need to step into your skirt to check if the length of the skirt in general is good for you. Otherwise, please adjust it to your needs. And then we're off to hemming your skirt. You have 1 centimeter hem allowance, which means that you fold it over half a centimeter to the inside, to the wrong side of your fabric, and another ½ centimeter again. This will be your rolled hem. It's a white rolled hem. And you pin it nicely, and then you sew with a narrow edge stitch all along your hem. You do this for the whole length. Make sure that both of your bottom blankets end up being the same length. We're getting to the final step. For the view C, it's sewing the buttonholes and the buttons to bottom blanket. Yeah, there is a recommended number of buttons in the sewing pattern, but as always, you can adjust it to your needs. So if you feel like it's not what you want it to be, I would recommend to quickly step into your skirt, pin it in the waist, and then have a look on how you want your buttons to be distributed, and if necessary, adjust it. So you transfer all your markings and sew the buttonholes on the right side of your skirt front and the buttons on the left side of your skirt front. Yeah.